Well, greetings, everybody. Um, my name is Todd. I gave a presentation about 2 or 3 weeks ago about virtual reality and this whole use of virtual reality and how that is increasing. And I pointed out in that presentation that game engines are really driving the programming of a lot of these new virtual reality games and experiences because they have a lot of the things that you need already built in with a 3D environment, a coding system, access to different libraries, music, audio, everything. And I talked about how when I am exploring this, I use this engine Unity3D, which is I think, the most popular engine for game development right now. Um, Primarily, I think because it has a very nice licensing system that you don't actually have to pay anything to have full access to the entire game engine. There is no premium features. There's nothing that you're missing. You have free access to this very powerful software that can do many different things, and you only have to pay them some money if you go over a certain amount of revenue in of your project. So I think it's like over $100,000. Until you reach $100,000 in revenue, you don't even owe them anything. I believe that's the case, but you can look into the details. The point is that today I wanted to explain people, to show them what Unity is. And I think it's important that people see the environment and kind of understand it, but maybe before they decide this is what they want to do. Because sometimes if you start on your own, it opens up like like a space craft panel where you say, this is way too complicated. I don't want to deal. I mean, any new software is like that. You just, when you look at install the software, you get intimidated. So I wanted to show the basic environment in Unity, show the basics of what you can do, just the very basics, just so people can look at it and say, yeah, I could do that. It's not so scary. And it really isn't. It's pretty remarkable what you can do in 5 minutes in this environment. So I'm going to start it up, and we're going to do some basic things, and I'm going to talk about the different panels and what there is in this environment. And if people have questions or want me to try something else, or they want to ask if you can do that, or what this panel means, I'll answer the questions. Okay. So the first thing that you should do, and I guess I should share my screen. I'm probably not doing that yet, so let me do that. Present now. My entire screen, I guess. Let's okay. So you can see my screen, is that right? Or no?
It's not popped up yet. You might have to select the middle.
Wants to share with me. Choose what you'd like to share. Okay, so I need to click on. Okay, there we go.
Yeah, okay, so got it now.
Now you can see my screen. Okay, so I'm going to pull up this thing called Unity Hub. Now, these days, when you install Unity, you also get the option to install another piece of software. It's not required to install, but JR said that he recently installed Unity, and it actually it encouraged him to install this thing. And that's this thing called Unity Hub. So can people see that now? I just pulled it up, the Unity Hub. Okay. So you see Unity Hub 2.31. So what Unity Hub does is it manages the installations of different versions of Unity. Like a lot of complex programs, there are new features. Some software that you get would only work with an older version of it. So just like Python or other things that you use, it's very common to have multiple installations of the same software at the same time. So you can add, for instance, you can see that it says installs. You can add a new version, you see, and it says, well, select a version of Unity. latest official releases, latest pre-releases. So you can get the alphas and the betas to test the latest stuff, which for this stuff, for Unity can be really fun because it's oftentimes the new latest, greatest feature is pretty cool. But usually you want to stick to these long-term stable releases, which will work with your add-ons probably, and won't crash and whatnot. Okay. So I've already installed on my laptop. I have a desktop where I do most of my programming on this stuff because it's got a graphics card and everything. But this is the latest version that's supported. So you would, if you wanted to start, the other thing I should say about Unity Hub is they have all of these tutorials now, and they're getting better and better for them, that you can go through to just learn the basic features. So even so the type of stuff that I'm going to be teaching now, you could also do it within a cool little environment with a bunch of objects and stuff set up. Although sometimes I think that has the disadvantage of giving you a misleading impression of what you're actually going to be doing, because you already go into this environment with all of these objects, and it can actually get overloading or overwhelming, in my opinion. But that's there for you. And then if you wanted to install your own project, a new project, you would go to the projects tab. And so in this case, I'll install one now. I tested one. So it says create new project with Unity. And you have the choice of kind of what templates you want to use. And these templates set a lot of basic things that you would use. For instance, if you were to choose 2D or 3D, you would change the perspective and the kind of the types of objects that you could add right off the bat. It also has the options to set up these render pipelines, which changes the way that the graphics would be processed, and make it all snazzy and adapt to your processor speed. So we're going to create one MakeHaven tutorial, and you'll see that it will take a little while to start. So that great. Let's see what happens. Let's hope it works. So yeah, it often will take. Sometimes it'll take 30 seconds or a minute or so. Let's hope it's starting. Okay, you see, so the window's coming up, initializing project template, and it will hopefully pop up. And so has before I get too further, has anybody used this at all before? Anybody in the chat? Okay, so this is all brand new to everybody. Okay.
And had we selected one of the other template, is that reversible in the course of working on it?
3D, 2D. Yeah, I think it is reversible if you wanted to. There's nothing in there that's unreversible, I don't believe.
Yeah, it's just a lot of settings. So
it's just a lot of little settings that you wouldn't want to have to deal with within the environment. You wouldn't start in a 3D environment and say, oh, I want to do a 2D environment. Why? And at that point, pretty much you wouldn't have made many objects. It's unlikely you'd be very far into the programming. So, but we'll see. And what's interesting is a lot of things that are 2D and 3D are now overlapping, right? Because you see how you now have these games that have all these 3D, like a platformer now is often a 3D game. It just looks like it's a 2D game, but it actually are 3D objects that are operating in the platform setting, if that makes sense. So true 2D and 3D are kind of becoming a lot of things that are in you might think are 2D, you actually would do in a 3D environment, if that makes sense. So
yeah. And while we're waiting, I'm curious if you want to just describe the types of things that you've done.
Yeah. I'm mostly a hobbyist, so I haven't done anything. I still haven't published anything, but I've been working in kind of two areas. One is, let me try to see you. One is in music visualization and soundscapes. I've always been interested in that. So I've been experimenting with the ways that you can play sounds and then change 3D 3D objects or shaders, or have the variables from the music affect the 3D environment. And then the second area that I'm working on and I'm hoping to do more and more with is this virtual reality, especially in the use of education, which I think is obviously a popular area of interest right now. And Unity seems increasingly like the best environment. So I've been experimenting with how to use these 3D devices. I'm actually using the thanks MakeHaven gave me access to their 3D headset, which once we're open again, hopefully we can, if there are people who are still interested, we can work on that together, and I can show you some of the things I've learned about that. So, okay, so we're now, it looks like it's loaded. Yes, Carrington?
So one question, I guess this is the one way of phrasing this question. Say I wanted to make a chess game.
Yeah.
Not like it hasn't been done before, but how would Unity be overkill for that? I mean, I would think of it as a 2D environment. There's a lot more kind of business rules than there is graphical engine involved with that.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think a lot of the kind of business rules and the logic would depend whether you are comfortable with using C#.
Mm-hmm.
C#, and you can obviously you could create an interface to, and there are APIs for Unity like other programming suites where you could have logic in Python or logic in something else probably, and still use Unity as your environment without a problem. But if you decided that you wanted to code your logic in Unity, you would I think the key thing would be, are you comfortable with using C#? Is that fair? And C# is a pretty, I guess I haven't really talked about that too much. Maybe I should briefly talk about that before I talk about the physical environment. Unity uses C#, which is kind of I guess you'd say kind of an abstracted form of C that's supported by Microsoft, that's compatible with their whole .NET and all of their stuff. But even despite the Microsoft hate, a lot of people seem to think that C# is a pretty good language. You don't get a lot of hate around it. It's got a pretty good syntax. I seem to like it. I don't have any problems with it. And I think if you're coming from Java or C or C++, or JavaScript, there's not too much in C# that will throw you off. But it's also abstracted to the point where you don't have to worry about memory management and all of that stuff, which you would have to do if you were using Unreal Engine, which is its main competitor, which does use C++ and forces you to deal with some of the pointers and memory stuff that a lot of people don't want to deal with in these days of abstracted languages. Of highly abstracted languages. Okay, so now I'm in the Unity environment and I can't see you guys anymore, so I might be a little bit awkward because I hate this whole system, but I will try to do my best. So as you can see, it does kind of look like a space station. There's all these panels and these things, but it's actually not too complicated. So the first thing I'll mention is that all of these panels can be changed in the layout section. So you can go to the default layout, which is the one that we're just in, or you can go to a wide version, which I think I've been using the wide version most. On my main computer, I actually have a specific one that I've created, and when you change the layouts, you can save them. So let's say we were to say, okay, I want the inspector to be huge for some reason. You then go to layout, save layout, and you can say my favorite. And a lot of times that is useful because the type of layout that you want may depend on what project you're using. Do you need to see the, do you have a lot of list of objects that you're working with? Do you need to see what the game state is at all times? You see how, I'll talk about it in a second, but there's some things that you may want to see at different times. So the top thing is called the toolbar. And this has the ability to start and stop the game, which you're always going to be doing. And also some kind of basic movement and scaling for your objects and your camera. And also a few things about looking at different layers or whatever and count settings. But the most important thing by far is the start and stop thing, which you're always going to be looking at. Now, the next thing is I guess, well, first I'll say this: the screen. You have this scene view, and the scene view is the view of all of the objects in your scene in this kind of hyperspace environment that you're thrust into. And you will add objects, you will change your cameras around, you will move around in this environment, and you can you put new objects, zoom in, zoom out, and move things around. And obviously it can get very complicated. Now the scene view is different than the game view, and the game view is the view that tracks the camera in your scene. You'll see that there's already under the hierarchy, which is the list of all of the objects, there's already by default a camera, and it's pointing at this direction. You can see in the upper right, in the object inspector, it has its position, its rotation, and things. So that comes in by default. And then there's also a light source that's created by default, which would create shadows and bring light to the scene. Okay, so you have the scene view and the game view, and I'll put in some objects, and we will talk about how the game view. But the game view is basically the view that the user of the program would see, and it tracks the camera. So the next thing you have is the hierarchy, and the hierarchy is the list of all of what they call game objects in the scene, and pretty much everything in Unity, in some way or another, is a game object. That's their convention. So the light source, the camera, the player character, the enemies, even things that you might not even think of as real objects, like your controllers, in many cases, are actually game objects, and they can have things attached to them. So sometimes you'll create game objects which don't do anything but just have some scripts attached to them. Okay, so and all the game objects that are listed in the hierarchy will have features to the side of them. So we'll start off, why don't we create a very simple game objects. So we would go to game object in the top, and there's also these, I guess I should also briefly mention that here are the tools. So you have a help, you have a window which adjusts the layouts and the different objects. You have the different components that you can change, and a lot of these are settings and other things you can add. You have a game object, which allows you to add these different objects or do things to the objects. You have editing for for going back, cutting, removing things, and you have this assets folder. And I'll talk about the assets after we deal with the game objects. But first, I'll just create a very simple game object. So we'll create a sphere, and we just have this default sphere. And when I click on the sphere, just to clarify this thing with the inspector, you can see what we get with a new game object. So we get its position. Well, we get a name for it. So a lot of times the convention is to immediately change it to player or something like that. So we'll call it player. And we will see its position, its rotation, its scale. So we could increase the scale. We could make it 3 times as big, or why don't we make it 10 times as big? So you can see. We'll make it. So we can increase the scale. We can also move it up and down, and you see how that affects the position. Now, when you have an object, not only can you increase its, change its transformation with these directional arrows, but you can also look at the gizmo at the top to change your perspective of your object. So you could look down at it from the y-axis, look at it from z and x.
It seemed to ignore your scale or jump back. Is that because you have to hit enter or apply, or is there something that?
It did. Let's see. Yeah, did it not? It didn't seem like it increased the size of it. That's what I guess. Oh, it didn't actually do it. Why did it not do it? What am I doing?
There you go.
There we go. You see, yeah, okay. Well, if I like, actually, a circle is not really the best object to do it, but you can see now it's changing the scale. There we go. Yeah, I don't know what happened before, why it didn't. I think maybe the angle that I was looking at didn't make it obvious what it was doing. But yeah, you can see it's changing the scale, and it will do it proportionally based on that axis. Usually you're going to be entering, you're going to put in a model of something, some asset that you have that you created in Blender or that you downloaded, and that would be an easy way to change the scale according to different axes. We can increase the position through this, through changing it manually, or we can adjust these the arrows. The other thing that you often will be doing when you have an object to focus on it is pressing the F key, which will give you a view of that object specifically. Okay, so let's put it back above the plane. You see the zero plane, and we'll press F again, and now we can see the object as it is. Okay, so you have this transformation, you have rotation, scale, you have the mesh render. The mesh render deals with like how it responds to lightings and the materials that are involved. So one of the things you might want to do, obviously, to an object would be to create a color for it. So how would you do that? Well, in your at the bottom of this area, you have all of your assets, and that would include your scripts, your models, but it would also include what they call your materials. So one thing you could do, and what the convention usually is to create folders in this assets folder, in this the list of your under the project window, in your folder for your assets, you'll create folders for different groups of things. And so one of them would be your materials, and it could also be models, and we'll get to scripts. So we'll create a new folder called materials. And then in that folder, we will create a material. And so we'll have a material. So what color should we create this ball that we've created, or the player? Why don't we make him blue? Oh, excuse me, I didn't actually select the color.
So is that a ball or a flat circle?
Sphere.
A sphere.
It's a sphere. So, okay, so there we go. So now we have this blue material. And if we wanted to now make the player that material, we would attach this material to well, you could either put it on the player, or you could attach it to this component. You see, it already has a default material, but we'll just put it. Well, I guess we can put it on here. So now the ball is blue, and it has this blue material, and you could do all types of other things to the material. You can make it more metallic-y, change the colors, and then do all the different, complex things about how it responds to light and other issues. Okay, so
is that simultaneously changing the attributes in the folder?
Yeah. No, you have a set material in the folder that is then changing what's applied to the object. If we were to change it again in the folder, yes, it would change it on the object as well. You see that. So that means that you could have a material that you attach to many game objects, and then just affect it, and it would dynamically change it on the objects as well, which is, I guess, pretty useful in most, I would think. Yeah, you don't. Most things in Unity, I would say, respond to their components. They're not like set at runtime or when you introduce them to the scene. Okay, so we have this assets folder. Now, what next could we do? Well, why don't we try to make it, so we have this player, we have this objects. Why don't we try to move it around or have it interact with something else? So one thing we should do. Now, one thing I'm not, I guess I should also get into is how to move the camera. And one thing that I guess I'm using right now, I'm using the keys. If you have a mouse, the problem right now is I'm using my laptop, which I wouldn't normally use in Unity. You can use your middle mouse button to kind of, if you hold down your middle mouse button, you can then rotate around, or if you use the Alt. Okay, here we go. So you can see I'm holding down Alt now, and that's allowing me to move directionally. Do you see that? But there's a lot of other ways to move the camera and your view of the scene with a mouse and with different shortcuts. So I think if you hold down, if you hold down the middle mouse key, yeah, you can then use WASD, the WAS and D keys to move around the scene. And that's something that you should maybe learn a tutorial on or look into, is all of these different shortcuts of moving around in the scene. But it's not too complicated. And you see right now there's this Alt thing. You can also change some of these features of how to move things around with these cameras, these things here. So the toolbar will give you access to these different tools that then you could use to change the rotation or change what movement is. And the hand tool would be the one that would allow you to move in the standard way. Does that make sense? So this toolbar gives you different ways to move around the scene and to have default options to change the objects. Okay, well, so we now have a ball that's called.
It is a sphere. It is a sphere. So no matter how you move it, it still comes out looking like a sphere. Except maybe the reflected light on it might vary. If it had corners or something, I think it would be.
Yeah, why don't we'll create another object that it can interact with. So the next thing we'll do is we'll create another game, another 3D object. We'll create which will be a plane that it can roll on. So we'll make sure that it's, so I just created a plane. Did everyone saw that? I went to game object, 3D object, plane, and we'll make sure that it is lower than the ball. Yeah, we want it at 0. Why don't we just put it at 0? Actually, why don't we'll set everything to 0, 0, 0. Yeah, and our object got, and we'll also make it, we'll make it longer so it can go. We want it so the ball can roll on it. So you see, I set it to 10 on the x-axis, and we'll set the ball so it can roll on this thing. Maybe we'll make it even larger. And like you said, why don't we create another object that it could hit? So for instance, this time we'll create like you said, a cube that it could interact with. And we'll put the cube farther down. We'll make sure it's at 0 or a little bit, actually needs to be a little bit above that. Oh, the sphere is so huge because we put it at such a big scale. We'll make the sphere a little bit smaller. Or why don't we make it there? Okay. So we have this object sphere, we have a little box, and the ball ideally will be able to roll around when we're done with this and hit the box. So, okay, so how we have an object. You see that it's very easy to create objects. You see that you can create materials to attach them to objects. But how would we control these objects, or what would we do next? We would create scripts. So here we have the player object, and we would create a new folder. Again, the convention is to create a folder for your scripts, and the convention is to call it scripts. So we could create a new, and then we would create something again new, and this time it would be C# script instead of material or anything else. And we would call it, ball controller. The convention is to have the scripts names capitalized, usually one word, while the objects can be 2 words. So actually it should be player controller because we called it player. So we'll rename it. And just like we did with the material, we would attach this to the player object. So we have the player object, and we could attach our script, our new script, to can I add script? Oh, excuse me. I guess I need to add new script. That's usually you wouldn't have to do that, but let's see. Player controller. Why is it? Okay. So that added that was a little bit odd. That added it. I don't know why it didn't take it in that. It should have just taken it in that. Here. It tried. Let me see if I can put it just directly in there. No, okay. What I did there was I used its automatic script creation feature. It didn't take it when I put it on there. I don't know why. If I put it, let me just do that. What I did again. Okay, see that time it accepted it. So but previously it gave me an odd error, but this time it worked. So ignore all of that. You should have just been able to get rid of it, remove it that way. And we'll delete this component. I'll just make sure it's the right one. And then I should be able to add from our scripts controller to here, and it'll work. Okay. I don't know what happened the first time. All right. So we have the script, and we'll open it up. And we'll open it up, and by default, Unity installs Visual Studio, which is the Microsoft IDE for doing C script programming. Anybody have any questions as it loads?
Well, yeah, a quick question. So
Sure.
The link between the script and the object is not via their naming convention. It's actually where you attach a particular script to the object.
Yeah. It's the naming convention has no impact. That's just the convention.
Okay.
It has no impact on. You could call it whatever you wanted. It would still work. Okay. So when you create a script, by default, it starts with a couple of different things, and it already accesses the libraries for the Unity engine and some kind of generic libraries that you need, systems, collections, namespaces, and then it will create an object, create a class that is uniform for any game object in a Unity environment, and that uses this mono behavior class that has a lot of many different methods attached to it. And there are 2 basic things, and this is a convention within a lot of game environments or other type of things involving graphics or kind of physical interactions, that it all revolves around a couple of key scripts. So you have a start script that can be called that the class automatically calls before anything happens in the game environment, and then you have another script that happens once every period, and the default is to do it once per frame. So why don't we start with just making the ball move forward without us doing anything. And that's a very simple thing. That's from a method. And you don't actually even have to refer back to the object. You can just use these magic word methods around, which sometimes is a little bit confusing because we have this method that refers to the transform or the position of the object, but it's not linked to anything. You just have to get used to that there are all these kind of magic methods that appear because you have this mono behavior and you have this object. So the method we'll use is just transform translate, and that is the method for transforming and moving an object in your scene. And if we were to do it according to the axis, so it's the X, Y, and Z, this would move it forward on the Z axis. So we will save it, Control C, and if we go into our object now, it should do it. It should be that simple. Now there were some things that we'll see that how we're going to have to further do things to that very simple line to make it more useful, but we'll see what happens. So we'll play. And now the scene view is going to shift to that game view that we talked about earlier. Now, let's see. It may not actually. Okay, so you see, we have the ball is below the sphere, and we have this above. So why don't we put that down before we do too much more? Okay, so we will put that down a little bit, and we will move this up. Okay, now it didn't actually move forward in a visible way, and the reason for that is because you actually have to make it match the time of to make it match the time of it, you need to multiply this that was a vector. 0, 0, 1 was a vector, and the default for the other way to define that is by using the convention vector 3 forward. And to make it actually update according to effective time, you need to multiply it by not just by the frame rate, but by something that matches the speed of the computer, because the frame rate could vary dramatically based off of the speed of the computer. So the way that you make it match what is being processed is by multiplying it by this convention of delta time. Okay. So now, if we run it, it should move forward in a reasonable way. So let's see. Oh, I think I know. Let's see. I didn't save the scene. So let's exit play mode. Okay, save the scene now. What is going on here? Okay. So we'll actually increase it. We'll increase it so it will go a little bit. It should be going faster. Maybe let's put our camera, attach the camera to the player object. All right. Okay. So I'm a little bit confused about why it is not moving automatically, but I think we can get around this by getting input and then just moving it manually. That should have been updating it according to each frame, and I'm a little confused about what I did wrong here because I prepared this, but we will move it forward. So we will now get an access from the input, and the way to get access from your keyboard or your mouse is you can change what type of input that is in the settings, but the default is to get an access from your keypad. So you would first define a variable that would get your input. So you could say public, like public input, public float input, and then that input would be attached to this vertical axis, and that would give you access to the keys. So now I'm pretty sure that we should be able to move it forward when we start. So save it. Okay. Okay. I'm going to attach a rigid body to this so it becomes a 3D object. Maybe that is what the issue is. So rigid body is gives it kind of mass and material. Oh, what? Oh, that was to the what? Oh my gosh. This was to the player. Okay, see so that already the ground already had a rigid body. This
So you thought you were adjusting the ball,
so
but
our
actually,
script, yeah, our script, I'm a little confused. So our script is attached to the player, is that correct? No, okay, now our script is not attached to the script is okay, the script is attached to the player. I have an error at the bottom of the screen now. Non is no longer supported since Unity 235. All right, so
So for folks who
yeah,
are there pre-made script packages?
yeah, there's
that
this
can be
this
dropped
basic
in?
tutorial that I'm doing right now. Is kind of the standard thing that you would do. So I should step back a little bit. So there is an environment on the Unity website that gives you a kind of that does the same thing where you create an object, you give it a rigid body, you move it forward, you get the ability to get input, and it should move appropriately. And that's kind of what I've been trying to do is to show you that you can transform and move the object according to this update script. Very simple. You could, for instance, create a speed variable, and then you have to create a public for that speed. And this is what you often see as kind of the hello world of Unity, and it's pretty simple. It should be very simple, and there are a lot of ways to do it. So I guess I'm getting too bogged into trying to prove that this works or it doesn't work, and it's a little frustrating. But the point is that you have this ability to make scripts, and it's quite straightforward. Okay.
Quick question.
Yeah.
So let's say that you attach a script to this sphere, and the purpose of the script, if we got it right, was not to have it take off like a rocket ship, but to roll down the plane.
Yeah,
would
exactly.
It move? Would it just move down the plane, or would you be able to make it look like it was rolling down the plane?
Yeah, that's the thing. It should be it should do that. It will roll because it will have physics, and you can change things like friction, and you could make it bounce into that object, and have a full physics suite. It has a full physics suite attached to it. So there are a lot of things you can do, and the sphere will respond with the physics of the sphere, and the box will respond with the physics of the box, and you can create different impulse forces, and you can create a lot of the scripts that deal with the interaction between objects are based off of collisions or things touching, and then you create in your scripts you have these new things that you can create, like void on trigger collision, or on or that will respond to the collisions of the physical rigid bodies or the physics objects that are attached. So each object not only has has the physics, it has the model, but it also has different types of physics boxes you can attach to it. So another one of the ones that's important, in addition to rigid body, which is what gives it its physics, is what's called the box. I'm going to get rid of this cube. It's like breaking everything. So in addition to the rigid body, which gives it physics, you can also attach these things called box colliders. And box colliders are what can trigger interaction between objects. So if another object were to hit that box collider, there would be an event created that could then you could be used to give points or to delete the object that it interacts with, if that makes sense. So
would a good thing be to load up some of their example games and look at the scripts and even steal,
exactly.
If I wanted a complex player interaction?
Yeah, that's what I would do, is to use some of their kind of very simple scripts. Now, one thing I can also show you is how this camera should adjust to the scene view. So here we can see how the camera is. We just changed the camera, and that when we start the scene will change the action. Now the other thing we can do is attach that to the player object, and that's what I was hoping to do, was to show that when we then move the player, the camera will track because it's attached to the player. Let's see again why it's not working here, but I think it may be that I have some setting off, because I just installed this on my laptop this morning, so there may be something odd going on. But I think this gives you the basic understanding of Unity. There's a lot of other types of objects that you can create that would offer even more things. Like you can create an audio listener. That would then be used to play sound files. You can create particle effects that would exist inside the environment. So like we could attach, and that you could create other new sources of light. But everything is a game object. So when and they can all have scripts that trigger and can interact with them. So.
Is there anything, if I was to make an object in Blender, say I made a robot, I have to reduce the number of polygons in that in order to make it really work for this because it's a game? Or how is it?
Yeah, that's a good point. So yeah, you would want to make it have as few edge. I mean, if you wanted it to perform well, and I mean, obviously graphics cards these days can deal with a lot. But if you wanted to make it perform well, you would try to reduce the number of edges in it, and and there's other ways you can optimize it for Unity in terms of the way that lighting interacts with it or the number of objects. You don't want to have too many objects in your scene. Another thing that you often will find when you're dealing with games is you want to remove objects when they're not necessary from the scene. So the scene holds all of the different objects that are operating in Unity at any given time. And so you want to optimize your code. Unity is also developing some new ways, a new kind of system called dots, which can be used to optimize code and make sure objects don't create too much. Another thing that I didn't get into, but maybe I could have talked to, is a lot of times you will be reusing objects in your scene. You have like an enemy class, and you want to have 100 enemies, but they're all the same objects. So the convention for that is to create a folder called prefabs in the assets. And for instance, if we wanted to make our cube a prefab, we would then throw it into there, and then we could use it as a prefab, and it would change it for all the cubes in the scene. So yeah,
So,
I'm sorry for getting a little flustered at this transformation thing. I don't know exactly what happened. I did it before, but I don't. The point is that you can now see that this is pretty straightforward. The way the code is organized, you can get input, you can get variables. Oh, another thing I didn't talk about is how variables, when you make them public, they then become available in the viewer. So you can see that when we created this this speed object on the player. Wait, no, we let's see, we made player controller. We should now have is it possible that the player script that I'm looking at is not the one that we remember how I created two? Could that be the problem?
I thought for a minute there that the script was somehow attached to the
remember
box.
I had two. Remember I created two? Is that the problem that this could be the issue?
The only thing that moved was the box.
Yeah, I think that what happened was I kept editing that wrong one. Does that make sense? Let's make sure.
Possible. Hey, could you animate the moon rotating around an Earth while the Earth itself was rotating?
I mean, I think certainly it's possible, given.
Could you like layer the Earth sphere with like the world map or the world, a photograph from outer space?
Yeah, absolutely. You could. I mean, I think Unity is not just for games. I mean, you can create kind of very complex animations.
There goes the box. It just took off to the moon.
I don't know. The box is not abiding by gravity, or it said it had some problem with the type of collider or something. That's very strange. So I feel like I'm a little bit cursed right now. But
that's That's all right, because sort of the theme of these is like learning together, and we learn how to troubleshoot these sorts of problems by seeing that there are problems.
And and that with Unity, it can be even more infuriating than I think in some ways with just regular code, because you're also dealing with this physics simulations, and you have really odd things that happen when you're dealing with physics and objects.
Well, I'm happy to see you having a little difficulty with it, because I know my day is coming.
Yeah, but please don't make it deter. I mean, honestly, when this is not a very complicated environment. I'm compared to game engines in the past. This is so user friendly. I definitely encourage people to use this. And I think something happened when I created those multiple scripts at the start of this that's making it not link up, and I'll figure out what I did wrong. But I hope I can do another one where I promise that I'll be more organized, and we will.
I'm encouraged to play with it for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the key takeaway that people are getting is you can see how things are organized, and the fact that I was troubleshooting, you could at least see the places that I had to go. We had folders of objects, we had a hierarchy of objects in the scene, and we have the inspector with all of the features of the objects. And you're just, when you're working in Unity, you're just going back and forth between those different windows.
And there are tutorials.
Absolutely. There are lots of tutorials.
Absolutely. Well, Todd, I know you had something at 1, and we were trying to keep it there. So I guess unless you had any closing advice for folks, we can connect offline about doing another session. And just to say thank you for taking the time and introducing this interface to us.
Absolutely. Yeah. And thank you all for coming. And I hope you guys got a decent introduction to it. Forget my stupid script.
Thank you. I enjoyed that very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Todd.
Thank you. Okay. Goodbye.
Great. Thank you again.